This is Holds to Heavens, a show dedicated to cosmos, to mythos, and to psyche. If you like what you're about to listen to, please consider leaving some stars or a review, or you can always share it with a friend. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Genesis 1:1. It's as if Venus in Gemini wrote that. Welcome to another podcast. I hope you enjoyed the new intro. The music is from Portico Quartet, the song Prickly Pear, and that will be the intro unless there's a huge protest against it. Until the next Venus cycle. That's kind of the rhythm that I have found myself in throughout the history of the podcast as I change up the intro to reflect the spirit that is always changing to the show. And so that Portico music and the invitation to share the love, stars, review with a friend. I mean, it's just good etiquette with podcasts. I also want to give a disclaimer about listening to this if you're in the future or somewhere within this cycle, maybe outside of this Venus cycle as well, that this show is still relevant, mainly because we're just talking about how to track Venus, how to hunt the moments that are beautiful. There's a story that is always relevant, and there's also a great invitation, which is, I think, my main purpose for this podcast, these shows for the specific planets, is how to invite them into your life. Not to just know what Venus and Gemini might mean in your natal chart, but really how to invite her into your life, how to build a temple for her in your heart, in the wild, in your home. All of these wonderful ideas of essentially animating your entire relationship, not just to her, but to your approach to astrology. And so if you are listening in the future, it's still relevant, I hope. This is also the year anniversary of the most listened to show I have ever done, which was the last show for Venus that I did almost exactly a year ago here in Dartmoor. And so a lot has transpired in this year. I'm now living here. I mean, I have no plan of returning to the US. I escaped successfully. That's right, I made it. And so many people, both back at home and here, don't understand how I made it. And let me share that story with you now, because I've experienced a few miracles in my life, but this one was a miracle that I'll never forget, and it relates very specifically to Venus. And so after 4 canceled flights back to the UK, after being stuck in my Airbnb during quarantine in Boulder, Colorado for nearly 4 months, I got a flight. I was able to choose it to be on June 3rd, which was the beginning of her cycle. And I had a deep knowing that she was going to get me home. And so this wild flight, which was from Denver to San Fran to Vancouver, back to London again, was the route. And it was so eerie traveling through the airports because they're pretty much empty. Everyone's wearing masks. Everyone's a bit paranoid to be close to you. And it's kind of nice because to be in an airport where there's no lines and security, to be on an airplane when you're not sitting next to anyone, is kind of nice. And so on my leg from San Francisco to Vancouver, I was having this dialogue with Venus as I was taking in the beauty of the San Juan, searching for orcas. And when we landed, I realized when I looked at my ticket that I had 10 minutes to catch my flight. And there was no way that that was going to happen. And little did I know that I was going to deal with customs, deal with paperwork, deal with security again, where they ran my bags 4 times. And so after all that, and running through the airport with all my bags that were quite heavy, actually, I was sweating profusely when I found the gate. And I also couldn't find the gate. And so sweating profusely, find the gate, I'm an hour late. And they're just shutting the door into the airplane. And so straight out of a movie, I'm like screaming, "Hold the door, hold the door." And the guy opens and he's like, "Wait, are you Adam?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, I am. Can I still get on the airplane?" He's like, "Of course, we were waiting for you." I'm like, "Oh, wow." Because what was happening while I was running is I was both praying to Venus, but I was also pleading with her. I was, in a way, threatening her. I was like, "Look, if you don't get me to London, if I don't get on this airplane, they send me back to the States, like, I'm going to stop talking about you in the way that I talk about you. I'm not going to do this podcast. Like, I'm going to be eternally pissed at this whole situation. I'm not going to be able to understand it. This is all going through my head as I'm running through the airport awkwardly with all my bags." And then I get on the airplane. And when I step on the plane, everyone's looking at me kind of with the evil eye. Like, because, well, we are an hour late to taking off. And I just collapse into my seat. And one of the flight attendants comes up and drops all this water next to my seat. Like, probably 20 water bottles. She's like, "You're going to need this." I was like, "I am going to need this." And then I was thinking, because the guy who held the door for me and knew my name, like, I just had so much gratitude. I was like, "Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother." Like, "Oh my God, you're a godsend. You're so amazing." I wanted to hug him. He's like, "No, like, we can't do that." I was like, true. So I get on this airplane and I'm thinking, I didn't think once about that man being a black man. It didn't even cross my mind that it was a thing, because I do feel that, like, all my black friends, all my black brothers and sisters are just that. They are my brothers and they are my sisters. And so, like, that act of kindness, and like, it was both an intervention by Venus, but like this very stark reminder of how insanely out of touch so much of this world is from where we're at, what we are as human beings. And I think the more we live with Venus in our hearts, the more we track her cycles, the more we tune ourselves to all of this, the more we realize how absurd that we even have to fight for this right now. And it was just amazing. Like, the day the Venus cycle began, that little interaction that I had, and then everything was smooth sailing from that point. I'm back. I reunited with my love, and, well, things are good. And so now that she's back in the sky, I have a student that actually saw her when she was 6 degrees away from the sun. 6 degrees. A lot of the books say that you cannot see Venus until she's 13 degrees. Gemini Brett once sent me a picture when she was like 8 degrees away from the sun. And so my student saw her in Maui, 6 degrees. And so these variants of how far a planet, especially Venus, needs to be from the sun to be visible are very changeable. It depends on where you're at, viewing conditions. Are you in an airplane or not? It's, well, a phase change. So Venus is back in the sky, even though I haven't seen her, but there have been reports. And this emergence of the goddess back into the sky is an incredibly exciting time of her cycle, of any synodic cycle, really. And new connections likely have formed, new heartstrings radiant between you and another, or you and something that you're really connected with. And one of the ways that I like to honor that, again, is with the new intro and just kind of altering the format a little bit, a new commitment because of the cycle beginning in Gemini to writing, more reading, more writing, moving forward in this cycle. And what I'm going to do in this podcast is, again, we're going to really explore where we're at and how to track her. We're going to share a story, and also I'm going to do my best to change your relationship to her forever, to enchant your relationship with astrology by talking about Venus in certain ways. So I hope this happens for you in your listening. And if at any point during this podcast you find yourself really understanding her in your chart, or this time we've had with her being so close in the retrograde, consider sharing some love, some gratitude. It's always a big lesson and practice in our lives to do such a thing, but you can do it so easily through the podcast app that you're listening on by leaving some stars or a review. And if you leave a screenshot of the review that you have left for this podcast, I will link you to the Venus class that I taught last month. And so all you have to do is send me a screenshot to my email and you get that class for free, just for sharing some love. And another way that you can keep wind in the sails of this journey of a podcast, if you're longing also for a connection to tribe, or those who understand you or can mirror you really from where you're at, go to patreon.com/AdamSummer, and there's the regular parlors that we have every month. There's the student parlors that we discuss all of the material of the apprenticeship classes that you're watching. There's monthly classes, like this month I'm going to teach one on counseling skills, which I'm really excited about. And so if you go to patreon.com/AdamSummer, even for $1, you get linked with all my patron-only shows, and you can even win a free reading with me. So I incentivize all of this. But really, if you enjoy the show, if you listen to all of the podcasts I do, it's just $1 to say, hey, keep doing it. There's a little wind for those sails. And so, one last thing I want to mention is that dear friend of the show, Adam Gainsbourg, has created a Venus cycle calendar for this cycle, and it's amazing. You can find it on my website at holstoheavens.com. So just scroll down beneath the podcast player and you'll see it. I highly recommend it. You can also purchase it just like everything else on my own site with Bitcoin. And he just shows very eloquently how the whole cycle works. There's images. I really like how Adam does models. They work for my brain, and I think they work for others as well. And so check out the Venus cycle calendar that's on my website. And I also want to add this, that the honeycomb planner, if you got the honeycomb planner for 2020, you should have got an email with their updated ones with zodiacal releasing and annual perfections, solar returns as well. And if you didn't, email them, because it's great to see the chart they have for annual perfections, but also if you're interested in zodiacal releasing, it's in that updated honeycomb planner as well. And if you haven't got one, I highly recommend the honeycomb planner. I've never seen an astrological diary that's more visually appealing, but also helpful in tracking everything. And so those are the plugs. That was the beginning. That music was Fortet, 4 Birds, and let's begin. As I record this podcast, Venus is at 6 degrees of Gemini, still retrograde, and just 1 degree away from where she will station at 5. The whole territory of her retrograde started at 21 and will end at 5. So that's the space of both the pre-shadow and the post-shadow, but the actual retrograde as well, which technically will end on the 25th of June, 2020. She will be a morning star until 2021, and she is also known in this phase as Lucifer. Rudyard used to talk about it like this, Lucifer and Hesperus, and a client of mine was talking about Luce and Lucifer in regards to this as well, and educated me about something with how Lucifer can be properly understood as the protector of the luminiferous void, or the luminous void. And I love this because she is emerging from the underworld. She is, in a way, naked as she came, like that Botticelli painting. And in our own experience, there are new connections being made. There are new declarations that are clear in our personal lives, but also in the big world as well. And so full of sea foam and little sprouts that are coming out of our hearts, hopefully, that we've made some honey out of our darkness as well, that this is where we're at in the Venus cycle. And you can track it by finding where Gemini is in your chart. If you use whole sign, it's an entire house, and then specifically from 5 degrees to 21 degrees of Gemini is where you're looking, okay? And so that's where we're at as we're talking. There's an emergence of something new and novel, and this is a really important point to distinguish between what occurs at the beginning of a retrograde, where she falls from the evening sky, and those old dusty mirrors begin to show up. Like for myself, I got a beautifully heartfelt message from an ex that we just kind of had a falling out. Nothing too bad, just we never really connected afterwards. But she's from England, and so seeing that I was from here, just the gratitude that she shared for our time and the apology and like everything, it was like the perfect kind of Venus retrograde experience that you want, which is closure, forgiveness, seeing in the old mirror and being like, wow, like I'm not that person anymore, and neither are they. Onwards. Yet I also got a butt dial from the only lady I've ever dated that ghosted me. And so got butt dialed, I think it was around the day Venus station retrograde, and then I picked up, and then I could just hear music in the background, and that's it. So a butt dial, but hey, Venus, it was a great lesson because it brought up a lot, and I was just like, yeah, onwards as well. And then there's always an unfortunate one because people aren't always down for closure. A lot of people hold on to their stuff, and they go from cradle till grave, or at least from trauma till grave, with the poison in their hearts. And so I got another one actually from an exit survey on Patreon with someone that was accidentally supporting me still, and just tried to poison my heart with the message. And it was just coming straight from the 12th house and unintegrated stuff. And I feel this compassion for folks who don't know how to move through energy like that don't know how to see that everything is a mirror. And so we all know that it's not fun to hold on to regrets or shame or vengeance. Like it doesn't, like every time it comes up in us, it doesn't feel exalted. It doesn't feel like it's healing our hearts. It just brings us down and starts to create this prickle, this static in our minds. And so I did get that as well. And for me, it was just unfortunate. It was just unfortunate because the way I live my life is trying to keep all connections clean and to comb out the heartstrings. And that's, I think, a good way for all of us to live. We don't need to like each other, but just to have clean connections, it's all right. It's all right. And it was also such a great teaching from Venus and Gemini about what the true medicine in her message is. It's something like this.
Communication is the only way. Start saying what you mean to say. All your trouble's gonna run away. Start saying what you mean today. Communication is the only way. Start saying what you mean to say. All your trouble's gonna run away. Start saying what you mean today.
That's it. Bella Fleck, and actually Dave Matthews singing Communication. Also, the music that brought us into this segment is a new track from Nick Mulvey called Begin Again. And in it, he talks about Mary a lot. And if you listen to the podcast that Nick and I did back in August, he talks about being one of Mary's boys. And yeah, after listening to that track, I was like, I get it. Like I texted him, I was like, I get it. Like, oh, the Mary connection, it's there for you. And then I also realized people have keep telling me this, but it like really grounded in me when I returned that I live on the Mary line. So there's these Michael and Mary lines that go east to west in England. And where I'm living in Dartmoor is right on top of the Mary line. And so that Empress of Heaven, that link to our human nature and earthly experience as mother, it's quite Venusian, really. And a year ago, when I came here, was when Venus was becoming an evening star. The maturation of the Scorpio cycle was happening. And now I have returned in this sense at the beginning of the Venus cycle. And so this Mary line is attracting me and teaching me and healing me in all these interesting ways. And I want to know more. I've looked up the book that was written. It has something to do with a dragon in the sun, right? Hamish wrote the book. Anyway, it's a thing. And for all of you listening in the UK, if you have some deep insight around it, I would love to know, because it does go through Avebury and Glastonbury, and it's an interesting line. There's all these sacred sites along it. And I guess I live on one of them. I do. So back to the communication element, because it's a big part of Gemini, isn't it? That communication is the only way, and it's also a form. One form of communication, of course, is language. I talk a lot about that on these shows and also in my writing. I feel we inhabit language. It creates our realities. So we're always better off if we tune our ears to it, and we're always keen on how we're using it. There's this interesting piece from Grail Speech by Linda Sussman, a wonderful book, a wonderful translation of the Parsifal Tale. And she speaks of the alphabet like this, that alpha equals the one who experiences breath. Beta is the enveloping quality of a house. So alphabet is a human being in a house. We are at home with breath. And sounds, so when we create words, we create worlds with the two. The only difference really is between word and worlds is an L. And if it's a lowercase l, it's that straight line connecting heaven and earth. I was just thinking that when I was looking at it, kind of like plants and planets, how connected they are, words and worlds, and that difference with the L there. Just musing in a Gemini way. But it is interesting. Absolutely. It's an interesting one. And the more we're aware of language and also how we're using it, the better off we are. Like if we are spreading poisonous words, or we're talking about people behind their backs, or we're just fighting with people on social media, that does nothing to evolve our speech or to evolve our hearts at all. Like I think it actually probably devolves or creates more toxicity in us. And so we just have to always be very careful of, say, when to speak, when not to speak, how we're speaking. It's all there. It's all within our alphabet. It's a very interesting one. And so a few things as well about the new mirrors. I mentioned the old dusty mirrors that come up, and usually what I observe is that is from around pre-shadow time to the station, and when she's falling from the evening star or evening sky. And once the cycle begins, which again was June 3rd, 2020, she begins to rise. Or she's moving swiftly and then is going to become a morning star. And it's in this period that I'm recording that we're in is when all these new connections happen. And one of the interesting ones that happened for me was this funny little coincidence of sorts that I had a reading with a fella from Dartmoor here, and I was back in Colorado. And so I was trying to confirm the session with him. We'll just call him Peter Mary. And I couldn't find the email, so I found him on Facebook and sent him a message to confirming it, and everything seemed all right. So yep, same time, yep, oh, that's good. Yet when I was getting close to the reading, he was asking me for money. He's like, so here, you can send the money to this address. It'll be all good. Let's use this Zoom. I was like, no. You pay me And here's my Zoom information for the session. And so there was all this confusion. So I hopped on the Zoom, and it was a different Peter Mary, but also from the UK. And turns out this character is not just named the same as my client, but he's also an astrologer. Also an astrologer that does something somewhat similar to what I was doing in the early days with exploring astrology, that is interviewing astrologers and kind of getting their story of like what got them into astrology and all that kind of stuff. And it was just so funny because he's like, well, we could just record a podcast then. Might as well record a podcast. And we didn't do that. And he hasn't reached out since. So I don't know if Peter Mary is going to have me on a podcast. But I thought that was interesting, like just with the new connections and whatnot. And I've been seeing it a lot with clients and students, and just being here and new connections that are, inevitably going to form. And so I feel also in this phase when Venus becomes a morning star, it's that, but there's also, of course, the people that remain in our lives, right? Like if we are in a relationship, if we are married, of course, our family and friends, that we have an opportunity to polish the mirrors with each other. And like that is so clear as well, like with coming back and having this phase, like a deeper commitment that like I'm here, I'm not going back with my love. And it's just so incredible that we met when Venus became an evening star, and now I'm back here at the beginning of a cycle, and like seeing how nuanced it is. But also when you really think about it, or you're tracking her with your dreaming, it's not that nuanced. It's really clear when you have the mind and the heart for seeing it. And that's what I hope this podcast and everything I do around the Venus cycle is helping you do as well. And so she's helping all of us in a way to see clearer and hopefully be attracting energies, not just people, but books as well, and content that is really showing us where we're at. That's a part of just the affirmation of like, this is what you're connected to. This is what you love. This is going to be a theme moving forward for the next 19 months, right? And so in the big world, there's definitely themes to be tracked and also to be concerned for. Not in a be scared way, but concerned in like, what are the implications of it? Because for example, when Venus stationed retrograde was when, at least in the US, everyone started thinking it was safe to come out of quarantine. I mean, it did get lifted, at least in Colorado and a lot of other states. And so remembering as well that quarantine essentially means 40 days, and Venus is retrograde for 40 days. Now, lockdown didn't coincide with the Venus retrograde perfectly, but it was, I remember it very clearly, like the energy changed in Boulder when I was there. And on May 15th, when she stationed, like there was parties by the river, things were different. It was so strange how quickly that changed. And then like the story has also changed, because amongst this swarm of misinformation and the dark bat wings of chaos that are flapping around with bad ideas and conspiracies, the fake news that's inhabiting the noosphere, that station was also on the Mars in the USA chart in the 7th house, 21 degrees Gemini. Now, traditionally, the 7th house relates to open enemies. Mars to the police. The police's main function is to defend and protect. That's Mars's function in our lives as well, is to defend and protect what is sacred, what we love, what we know has value. That's what Mars does. He obtains it and he defends and protects it. The cops, that's their job. And so this station happens, and then, well, if you're listening to this in the future, we are in it. This is when Chaz has taken over 7 city blocks in Seattle. This is when there's riots and protests all over the world, not just in the US, around Black Lives Matter. This is the boiling point I didn't expect until Mars was to go retrograde in the fall. And so that kind of changes the story that I have around like, well, if this is happening now, what's going to come in the fall? I don't know, but I have a hunch of what might come as that Mars stations in Aries in September and then brings us into the election. And how to see it in a positive light is that, well, this change needed to happen. The Boneyard, which are all the solo shows that I've done over the past 6 months, built up a story that there is a toxicity in the world, but also in our own little worlds that needs to change. And so like we're seeing that very clearly. That's really to me what the virus has been, is it's exposing all of the weaknesses within all systems. And now seeing that economic collapse is pretty much inevitable, that balancing of power, taking that away from the police and just re-envisioning what civil society might look like is ultimately a positive thing. But to get there, I'm just really happy I'm safe in the moor right now. I would be on the streets though. I think I would. Like I'd be a part of those protests if I was in London or if I was back in Denver. I would, but safe in the moor is where I'm at right now. And so there's these themes, right, that are bubbling, and we're going to carry them forward for the entirety of the Venus cycle. And then, still talking about the big world, there's the Red King, the world's least favorite Gemini, and his maggot-filled words. His Twitter fight, the conspiracies around George Floyd that are happening, that he and the police are just crisis actors. One of my favorite, that doesn't necessarily relate specifically to the Venus retrograde, but it's still a message from a founding father, I feel, was on the eclipse on the 5th. So just a couple days after the Venus cycle began, lightning striking the Washington Monument. I mean, there's so much about that is just mind-boggling. But traditionally, dragons, sky dragons, relate to thunder and lightning, but of course Jupiter is lord of such things, and Jupiter is the ruler of the U.S. chart. That symbol, that phallic occult symbol, is that of the founding father George Washington, and Sag eclipse, and that happens. Like nothing could be more poetic than that, except maybe murder hornets. Oh no. Right? The murder hornets. I have a few friends that have had encounters with these hornets already and how they're attacking the bees. Like a couple of my beekeeping friends. And well, bees are my favorite Gemini insect. Like they are the great pollinators, and like just the way they work and the way they just check everything out and do so much of the groundwork or the air work of nature. It's a very Gemini insect in my opinion. And these murder hornets take out the bees. And so that battle is raging as well in the, well, not unseen world. There's the unseen world of the virus battle. There's the insect world. And then, of course, what's happening in the human terrain as well. And so it's at a rolling boil, I suppose. I mean, the news is always bad, but man, the agenda these days, it's just next level. And so it's why, if you saw the post, I was curious yesterday around where everyone is getting their news, because I cannot have a conversation from one to the next where people are talking about all of this in the same way. Like everyone is really plugged in to a different story arc, and that too is very worrisome. It's like we how can we all agree on something? It seems the only thing we can really agree on is that Black Lives Matter, which I'm in full agreement on. Like I'm so happy that this fight is happening, but like even agreement that the virus is real, like any of it is just, it's so impossible. And so for me, and really it's kind of always the case, it's like I'm tuning my ear to nature and the language of birds, those eternal songs that decode the hidden meanings between things, like the translations perhaps of the Rosetta Stone. And I think it's this hermetic idea of the language of birds that helps us to see clearly the hand behind the tarot, to show us exactly how astrology works. There's something to it. Absolutely. And as Venus continues to keep this information raining down like a monsoon, I think it's our job to practice discernment in a way like we never have before, to remember her, to never lose our ground state in all of this. And these machines that we're always on, I'm talking into one right now, you're listening to me on one right now, they're designed to keep us distracted with the invention of the infinite scroll and just podcasts forever, YouTube, just it doesn't end. There's so much there. We need to practice discipline and discernment and like always come back in, always return to the ground state, always be spending time in nature, because who really is in control then? Like if we don't have proper relationship to these devices, to the black mirror, then the mirror isn't polished. It's just an algorithm controlling our minds. And so, praise be to the language of birds. So we now know that music makes plants grow better. I wonder of the effect of birdsong. I think Cosmos Sheldrake does as well. That was his little tune of nightingales waking up. But back to that idea. If it makes plants grow better, what about people? Does it help us grow better? I mean, it helps us study. There's studies on that. So if our songs can help plants grow, certainly birds are even better at it. For the plants, but also for us. Maybe, a cure for COVID-19. I don't know. It's just a wonder I have when I'm thinking to birds because their voices are so perfect. Their songs have evolved to this way where I just am constantly wondering, like, what is it? How did it come to be this way? They are the best singers, aren't they? They are the best. And when it comes to story, these are all Gemini ideas. Story is a kind of music. How it's told, the pauses, the words that are used, and this is all very Gemini. It's woven with the Gemini Sag matrix. And our tellings of our own stories, but also of other stories, create realities. So we always must be watchful, like an owl on a branch, closely watching our tales. No lies, just enough spice to bring a smile and a touch of inspiration. So, kind of keeping with the tradition from last year, we talked a lot about the Eros and Psyche story in relation to the Venus cycle. And I was very pleased to find in this book, Myth Astrology by Raven Caldera, I've spoken of it before, that when you open to Venus and Gemini, it's Eros that he's talking about. And he writes, in these modern times, the name of Cupid, the Roman name for Eros, brings forth a bunch of chubby little winged babies flying around in Valentine's Day cards. These are also sometimes called cherubs, in a confusion with the Hebrew angelic spirits referred to cherubim, which were actually giant monsters made of multiple wings and eyes. Eros was personified in ancient Greece as a youthful boy, slender and handsome. In the Renaissance, portrayals of him as a winged toddler came into vogue. And so he goes on. Either way, there is one thing that both presentations of Eros have in common. They are both less than adult. This is telling, especially when we are talking about Venus and Gemini. Ruled by Mercury in this placement, Venus is often like an archetypal butterfly, flitting from one place to the next, or like a bee. Eros, too, is always in flight, which is appropriate for this air sign. A Venus in Gemini never seems to touch Earth, in the sense of making commitments or admitting one's own earthly weaknesses, or being willing to climb the mountain of work and success, romantic or otherwise. A Venus in Gemini wants to be able to fly all the way up and land quickly without all the work of step-by-step climbing involved. Then, when he does land, he finds that the treasures that slower folk find are not there for him. This is one of the great but difficult lessons of the Earth. So also as a reminder, Eros being the son of Venus and Mars. That's important. So I really, like, whenever I encounter that kind of stuff in an astrology book, I kind of glaze over just the cookbookiness of it all, because I know many Venus and Gemini folks that aren't exactly like that at all. But it kind of tunes us up to a few themes that are important. Say, if we're going to relate Venus and Gemini to Eros. And a lot of it, like for me, is around ideas, right? It's like, are we just virtue signaling? Are we hopping on idea trains without fully understanding the implications of an issue? Are we getting completely swept up in a new dynamic and making promises that we do not think we can keep? Or don't know if we can. Like there's all of this that shows up in the Eros and Psyche story. Like the God house, that he rescues her from the cliff, from the monster, and then brings her off into the God house, and it's just perfect there. But it's just the two of them. She never sees his face. He just slips in every night and makes love to her, but like cannot see him. She has no idea who she's even with. And it's not until her sisters come about and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you're hanging out in this palace with this guy and you've never seen his face. You don't know anything about him. You don't know where he goes every day. And Raven in the book tells a story of this character who he knew or worked with or something that had Venus and Gemini, and for years led this lie with his partner that he was an undercover agent and needed to dress up as a woman to track this story. Well, it turns out that for all these years that he actually really liked dressing up as a woman, and that he got caught by like friends of theirs in a certain club or bar or whatever it is. And it's like that kind of double life that is possible with the Venus and Gemini. Now, that's where he goes in the book. Like, it's not something I would necessarily come up with when talking about Venus and Gemini, because let's just break it down for a moment. Venus helps us to connect to what we love most in life. Gemini is the part of us that is constantly curious and interested, like the butterfly he spoke of or the bees, and needs variety, right? As a Gemini, I don't have Venus in Gemini, but I have enough planets there to understand how to hack into that, where for the way that I've created my world with astrology, it needs to be vast. It needs to be interdisciplinary. I can't feel that I'm trapped with any form or way of doing this. And for a person with Venus and Gemini, and this is also for all of us right now, like we need to have beginner's mind. We need to have a territory that is open enough with variety and enough flavors to where we can constantly feel that stimulation, and then we're connecting all of the different nodes in the network and creating beautiful webs for good things to come. Like, that's the beauty. I mean, it's also the great wisdom of the feminine, of not going after what it is that we want, not just scrolling endlessly on Tinder or going to singles bars looking for love, but to instead create a beautiful web, which for us in real time looks like our art. It looks like how our body is because we're taking care of ourselves. Just a beautiful web of prayers and praise to the goddess, and just waiting for the gifts to come and to fall into our web. That's how the feminine works, it seems. And I think a Venus and Gemini moment, like a cycle that we're moving into, I think the meta question is, like, what has she brought to you that is most interesting during this cycle? And sure, it could be a person, but I also think it's really important to track the ideas or the new ways of thinking about issues or whatever it might be. And then, like with working with the Mercury cycle, you become a hunter of moments with those ideas or what it is that she's trying to bring into your world. It's something like that. And also what's interesting in this book called Myth Astrology, Mars in Pisces, which was square to Venus when the cycle began and still is in Pisces, he relates to Psyche. And so Eros, Venus in Gemini, Psyche, Mars in Pisces. And that too is so appropriate because what he talks about in that chapter is the 4 trials that Venus gives Psyche to prove her love for her son. And so she has to sort the grains, and then it's impossible. It's a fool's errand to do such a thing, because it's just a mountain of different grains, and to put them in perfect piles, I mean, come on, like, not going to happen. And so she employs the help of ants to do the job. She needs to get the golden wool from the rams, but the rams are always fighting and they're dangerous creatures. And so she waits for the heat of midday where they're all napping and then go picks a bunch of it from the bushes. Cunning as well. Needs to get a cup of that water from the dangerous waterfall. It's impossible, no humans ever come back from, but employs the help of an eagle in a shamanic sense, but also with the sight and the flight of understanding how to solve problems that no one else has solved before. And then finally, how to procure the beauty box of Persephone. What is the secret to Persephone's beauty? So she needs to make it through the underworld without getting distracted by desperate souls or those voices of doubt and shame, the great sins of our mind, and make it across the river Styx, make it past Cerberus, so bring 3 biscuits, and procure that beauty box after cracking a pomegranate with the underworld goddess. All 4 of those are successfully completed. Well, she can become reunited with her love and also become the goddess herself. And so a lot of this, like the fantasies or the projections we get in around certain ideas or with partnership, we haven't been through those trials yet. And it's those trials, like, are we willing to go through to prove our hearts or prove our love for them? I mean, there's so many interpretations of this, but I place it within your imagination to work on, because whenever we're talking about a Venus or a Mars cycle, like, we are also somewhere in the Eros and Psyche story, somewhere in there. And at the end of Martin Shaw's The Night Wages, which is a great story of a father and a daughter going after or sailing towards the Temple of Venus, this story is told in a really beautiful way. And at the end of it, it says, he writes, "Beloved, once you awakened me, now I awaken you. You have almost completed the task. Get the box to your mother, and I will address Zeus himself to make clear our love." On Eros' arrival to Olympus, Zeus was enthused at the clear growing of this boy, this one who had caused such havoc, even to him in his canopy of lovers, had sprinkled mayhem into the gravitas of Olympus. He praised the union, and also Aphrodite, for the difficult lessons taught before such a wedding can take place. She, ocean maker, had hurled grit and testing on those two, and with her cast of goodly instructors forged a deepening bond. Scar tissue, some would say. Psyche was brought forward and offered nectar, a drink that when drunk made her divine, equal in every way to her husband. The great wedding took place. Aphrodite danced. Dionysus poured wine. Pan played his wild pipes. All of this is going on inside of us all the time. On the mountain peaks of high Greece, they are still cleaning up from that wedding. And so for such unions to occur, there are many trials and tribulations, ways of proving our dedication to other. But also the most important thing, which we explored in the last show for Venus, but also I will mention it now, is everything we love, everyone we have ever loved, everything we possess, everything that has value in our lives is just a drop of water in that ocean that is Venus. That it is her we have to remember. It is her we need to build a temple to. It is her that we always need to thank when we feel moved by beauty. When we experience beauty, it is a touch of Venus that is present. And the more we train our hearts to act like this and our minds to think like this, the closer and closer we get to her. So if you are seeking for true love, don't seek in the way of false masculine, going after it. Make a beautiful web. Call it in. Trust that Venus knows best and she'll bring it to you. Don't get overly involved in tracking the transits and progressions of Venus. It'll come. And when it comes, you will be able to see how incredibly beautiful that transit is. It'll be like Venus becoming an evening star in your 7th house, or Venus trine your Venus from the 8th, or something like this. You'll see it. You don't need to seek for it and create an electional astrology nightmare for yourself. Just create a beautiful web, make her blush with your praise poems, and wait. Because what else can we do? There is a currency to longing. I know that to be true. When inviting Venus into your life, it is important to be curious about deepening and or discovering the secret to manifesting good love and abundance and infinite beauty into your world as well. And again, the way of doing that is to keep her temple clean, to not desecrate her statue, to keep the fire lit. And so when I'm talking about the currency of longing and working with Venus in this way, it's not always around eros or romantic love. With Venus and Gemini in this cycle, it's also like, what are the ideas that you need to court? What are the ideas that you need to keep close and tend to and make all of the necessary connections, kind of like a mycelial network, to where something can actually sprout in the right conditions out of it. And if we are keeping the temple clean and our prayers strong, then we're tracking her in all of our moments. It's a form of echolocation where she will remind us with small delights and little appreciations, little bursts of abundance. That's how she can remind us of like, oh, there it is, that feeling. Oh, there it is, like that synchronicity. That's how the gods speak. Or if it's an action, like how are we treating each other? How well we are showing up and honoring where each other are at. Everything is always emotion, so we must accept that. Nothing's static, nothing is owned. And we just need to act in response to the miracle of being able to connect and share each other at all. I mean, it's a miracle in every moment. And in heart, what does it look like? Well, all good thoughts sprout from the heart. Not from your social stream, not from me, not from your head, but from the heart. And we need to trust that. It's Venus's outlet through us. She works through the heart. And so with practicing gratitude, being steeped in praise, having enough to make her blush, because she's behind all of it. Everything that we love, everything we're connected to, we can't ever forget this. The elders often say, the only sin is doubt. And if we doubt her existence, if this mythic leap or this animistic way of thinking about astrology brings doubt up in you, it's also doubt around your own heart. It's a sin. And so we need to trust it. The heart is where all the good ideas come from. And so may it be so that you know this deep in your marrow. You know this in the space between the beats of your heart. Then Venus becomes your guide. One thing I learned from her this retrograde so far is that all roads lead to Egypt. The complexity of soul, for example, and how the ancient Egyptians broke it up between the Ba, the Ka, the Ki, with Ra, just their language with hieroglyphs. I mean, there was many different languages that were spoke, but there's so much of it. There's a richness in how it seems that most myths lead back to Egypt. All the deep and mystical ideas, they lead back to Egypt. Probably even before that still, but like it's the ancient Egyptians that were onto something, and whether the pyramids were built then or long, long before it, there's a key that is kept there. And so our tradition in talking about really both Vedic and Western astrology, I think that there's something even beneath it. And whether it starts in Egypt or some other ancient civilization, like we have to go back to move forward. And so I've been seeing this in so many ways. She's just been like placing books and ideas and conversations in my way throughout the cycle. And so I have this big and beautiful copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In conversation with my lady, she's told me all these things about her father, Michael Bajan's journey with his ideas and his books and how it led him to Egypt. Like he was just obsessed with Egypt by the end of his life, and he was learning hieroglyphs and whatnot. And this happened to me just the other day, and it's been mind-blowing. I'm so excited. It's staring at me right now, this book. But I really trust Tim Ferriss's suggestions. And so if you don't know who Tim Ferriss is, look him up. He's got a great podcast, but also he has this newsletter, one of the only newsletters that I actually read, called 5 Bullet Friday. And so every Friday he has these 5 shares of what he's reading, what he's listening to, what he's up to. And I discover so many great things through that newsletter. And last Friday, he suggested this book called Little Big by John Crowley. And I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with this book. I don't know how I wasn't familiar with this book, because it seems that John Crowley is quite an esteemed writer of the 20th century and of today. And when I was looking him up, I saw this book that he had written called Egypt. I'm like, that's interesting. So I ordered both the Little Big and Egypt. And I actually received Egypt first. So I started reading it yesterday. And in the prologue, it describes how this book is organized, that it's actually the first of 4. And it's organized with the astrological houses. So the first book, which also was called The Solitudes, is the first 3 houses. And it just blew my mind. I was just rocking in the hammock with a little bit of that rare sunshine in Dartmoor reading this. And I'm like, that's it. Like, that's the feeling. Because the moment, I didn't need anything else to read. I have so many books I have to read. Like, I mean, my New Year's resolution was to read as many Michael Bajan books as I can. And I haven't even gotten through one yet. So I don't need another book to read. But when I saw that suggestion by Tim, and he was just saying this is one of the best books he's ever read, and he was describing why. And so I trusted his opinion, and I went and followed my heart around it. And it's led me to this modern author who has, in a very intriguing way, taken a lot of these old esoteric ideas, mainly from the Renaissance, and turned them into fiction. I'm so excited to read these books. And if anyone's listening that has read the 4 of them, like the Egypt series, please share with me your thoughts, because I'm going deep. It's one of the gifts that I've received from Venus. And so in just 40 days, not even 40 days, a quarantine, so much of my own worldview has changed because of the gifts of Venus. My question to you is, how has it changed you? That is, what did you see in the dusty old mirrors? Did an old fling come up and distract you, or were you able to look in it and be like, wow, I've come a long way, or they've come a long way? Have you moved through some of the energies that were left unresolved? Have you been able to forgive? And when it comes to the realm of ideas and connections and everything, like maybe deep purpose has awakened in you through the movements on the streets, by what's happening in the big world. Like something has shown itself, like this is what I'm born for. Like I want to plug into this. I want to be a citizen of Chaz. I want to be a citizen of Chaz. And anyhow, all big questions, and we're not done. We're not done. I'm releasing this before the Venus retrograde's even done, and there's also post-shadow work for us to be done or experience as well. And so what I want to do now is just kind of rapid fire some of the B-sides or V-sides that didn't quite make the cut for the main content of what we've explored so far. And so, for example, the message on my yogi tea that I'm drinking at the moment before this show, I steeped it and it said, the voice of your soul is breath. I mean, that's pneuma. That is such a Venusian idea. It's like the more conscious we are of our breathing, the more we're in that sacred rhythm, the more we are connected to heart, the more we're connected to the ground state. It's a very important idea. It's a free idea, and it's one that could completely transform your life. Another V side, which to go back to the Tim Ferriss, John Crowley story, is that Tim has Venus in Gemini. He has a Venus-Mars conjunction, actually. And so that was actually a part of it for me, was that through him, Venus in Gemini like worked some magic and placed it on my North Node. And this was all happening yesterday when the sun was exactly to the degree on my North Node, Venus on my midheaven. And we were talking a little bit about making webs earlier. And I think this is an idea that I want to ground out a little bit more, that we live in a world that both in men and women, there's a wounded masculine, we'll just call it, or a false masculine that's present. That like in men, it's weakened, it's overcompensated, it's a lot of things to where it's toxic, not just in our cultures, but like in many cultures. Like it's not in a good expression in general, right? And then also in women, it can become overcompensated. Like when the men really aren't showing up or the men aren't around, the men don't return from war, the men, you get the idea. And so it overcompensates. And I think that women are magically, absolutely mind-bogglingly mutable and malleable, that like they can create a spear from their will. They can create a man within themselves and show up. But can a man do that with a woman inside? I don't know. It's an interesting one, like the feminine power that is present. And I think that there's so much around this lessons from a spider thing. And a lot of these ideas sprung from that book I suggested you all read a couple months ago called The Time of the Black Jaguar, where Arkan Luswala talks about this as well, like his lesson from a spider and like this deep insight around the feminine. It's incredible, but it does relate to the Venus cycle. Like, what does it mean to weave a beautiful web? That is, be an artist. Make your life art, right? Create, like, what are you connected to? What really turns you on, like, in that sense, not sexually, but like, what are you all about? And then create from that place, and then people will come to you. The world around you will completely change, and it's in that web is when there is this incredible health to the dance of Mars and Venus, of the masculine and the feminine. And I just love this idea. Also, Venus has been out of bounds for quite some time, starting on April 2nd, pretty much April Fool's Day, until June 1st, Venus was out of bounds. And I did a podcast with Tony Howard about out of bounds planets a couple years ago. I point you to that one. And with Venus out of bounds, it's something I always observe. It's something I don't necessarily use all the time with clients. But to just ponder for a moment, like throughout that period, like early April to June, I mean, this is the heart of a lot of the lockdowns around the world. And I think that it was an offer to really step beyond our comfort zone and to find love in places that we wouldn't have before, or to find love for those that maybe don't see the world like us, who look different than us, who speak another language, who disagree or even fight us. Like, is there a capacity for that kind of love outside the bounds of what we are used to or what we are taught, what we are culturally programmed to think? And did we, in that out of bounds experience, brush up against something like the goddess, something like agape? Did we find deep compassion, even compersion within that place of chaos and injustice and just frustration and fear? There was so much, like a swarm of emotion that we all still are experiencing, and it's in this, like, are we having glimpses of the infinite through the heart and also with goddess? One of the great pieces of art that, at least for me, I tried to show this to my lady and she couldn't even get through it, but I have a place in my own heart for Duncan Trussell. And so to see him create his first kind of quote unquote special in the form of a cartoon called The Midnight Gospel, that too was released during the pre-shadow, and it's just it's so good, like a space cast through a multiverse simulator, and like it's amazing. You'll find it on Netflix. The conversations on there are so good, and I point you directly to the one that'll make you cry with his mother, who has recently passed, and he has a south node in Gemini, right? And so there's like these little angles there. What else? Edward Tick leaving me with this quote after our last conversation that has kind of etched itself in my mind, which is to forge thy tongue in the anvil of truth. I like that. We live in a world where we don't know what's true. I think that's what excites us so much about conspiracy theories, is that like if we find one that we really resonate with, we feel like we know something that everyone else doesn't. Depending on our disposition, whether we're standing up on the soapbox screaming to the world around it or not, like when we get close to the truth, we have a predisposition of getting a little arrogant around it. But like we're all around for the search for truth. And I think that's also true with astrology, because once we start seeing how astrology works, we're like, oh my God, I've figured out the secret to the universe. Like I know this, and we become an evangelicist around it. Like everyone needs astrology. Everyone needs to have this in their life. It's like, well, you do. We do. I do. I definitely enjoy it, and it helps me understand things. But everyone, we're all different. We all have different ways of understanding the heart in our navigation of this life. And so forge thy tongue in the anvil of truth. Truth is heavy. Another quote from a Gemini, Martine Prechtel, says that living the life of an artist is not as useful as living our lives as a work of art. That's it. It's kind of like the idea that I often say of one doesn't have to practice magic to live magically. As long as we're living artistically or living magically, like that's really what matters most, not how well your technique is as far as the art or that of your theurgy and ritual and practice. I mean, that's all fine and wonderful, like it's interesting, but how well are you living? Like what are your relations like? What's your relationship to your own mind, your own speech? Like that's where I'm most interested in. Like show it to me, prove it to me. Like do I feel inspired every time I'm around you? Like are you living from the heart? Beautiful words from Martine. And then if we can imagine a future where the gurglings and mutterings of the earth, the songs of the birds, and the aches of stone mean something to us, then as Robert Bringhurst says, it may be that as a species we will soon learn again what we generally once knew, which is how to live in the world on the world's terms, on Venus's terms. To become beauty makers, not beauty takers or beauty haters, but to become one who walks with Venus. Now, again, if there was something in that show that really lit you up, or kind of changed your relationship to Venus, consider on your podcast app, just leaving some stars or a review. If you do leave a review, take that screenshot, send it to me, and I will link you swiftly to the Venus class that I taught last month. Also, go on over to patreon.com/Adam Summer to join the community. It's a way of really making that dove in Venus's heart flutter. You can consider joining us for the class this month about counseling skills, or joining at the higher level and learning astrology through the apprenticeship classes. And there's just a lot of ways of engaging and taking your astrological learning to the next level at patreon.com/Adam Summer. Also, if you are interested in going deeper into the Venus cycle, just on the main page of my site, if you scroll down beneath the podcast player, there's a link to Adam Gainsbourg's Venus cycle calendar. I highly recommend getting it. And you can also purchase it with Bitcoin, just like everything else on my site. This podcast is brought to you by Solarfire as well. If you would like to track her down, well, that sounds kind of intense, but if you would like to track her like a pro, go to alabe.com, get some Solarfire into your life, use promo code SOMA, and you will get 25% off of the program. This podcast is also brought to you by Four Sigmatic. I've been very much enjoying what Venus drinks every morning, which is this adaptogenic coffee that has ashwagandha and some mushrooms in it. It's so good. I love the packaging as well. I'm kind of superficial like that. I judge things by their covers, and so Four Sigmatic is quite good at their marketing and packaging, but it's great coffee, and it's what Venus drinks every morning. And so if you go to foursigmatic.com and use promo code SOMA, you will get 10% off of their program. And also with the Solar Fire, it's not 25, it's 15% off, I think. Yes, 15, just to correct. So on my site, there is many different journeys that we can go on together, but the Venus journey is the one that I would recommend with where we are at. Come fall, it'd be the Mars journey, but being we're at the beginning of the Mars journey, it's not a bad time to go on a Venus journey together and get to know her better, both in your natal chart, by progression, how to work with her in a really magical way in your life, how to basically weave that web I talked about throughout the podcast. And so you can find that at holstoheavens.com. And also all the classes as well that I've taught on Venus, and there has been many over the years. And if you use promo code HALF in my store, you will get half price off of those classes. It's a way of me encouraging your learning during this time, this very odd time. And yeah, astrology is very helpful to navigate chaos. And I want as many people on this beautiful planet to understand the language with me. Not just so I can talk to all of you on that level, because it's going to change your lives. It really does. Astrology does change lives in really interesting ways. And so that music again in the background is Fortet. They brought us in, they brought us out, and I'm going to leave you with a song by Nako Bear. It's from his new album that released the day Venus Station retrograde. I have a creeping suspicion that Deb Silverman told him to do this, but I have no confirmation on that. Nako, if you're listening, let me know. Also, you're invited on the podcast anytime. And the song is called Honor the Earth. And it's a beautiful song that I think could just be called Honor Venus in a way. And in the chorus, he sings that the mother comes first. Live in a good way for her. And so may we live in a good way for Venus, for the earth, for the mother, and goodness, leave her in a better place than where we came in, right? And also, I learned this new word. This too, I want to mention before I say goodbye to you. Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. It's Greek for pretty much finding your life's purpose. It's a human flourishing in prosperity, blessedness. Eudaimonia. I think I did that right. Eudaimonia. So I wish that to all of you. Be well, be kind, and may you flourish along your own weird road. Eudaimonia. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, share it around with a friend, and I'll talk with you next, likely with my love. Ciao. Thank you again for listening to the podcast. Sorry I wasn't able to share the song. YouTube is a bit more strict than the podcast apps. So if you'd like to listen to the whole show, go over to Spotify, the podcast app, SoundCloud, or really wherever podcasts are found. This is Tree Theater. Ciao.